you know, they play a very important role. Must remember that, particularly for young children, there are two very important groups. The first is the parents, and the second are the friends, the peers. And so as a child grows up, I think there's a shift of, let's say allegiance and influence from the parental base through to the peer group. So if we start with a younger child, it's very important that the child picks up from the parents, not so much what the parents say, although that is important, but also is what do the parents do? How do the parents conduct themselves? How do the parents resolve their problems? Parents under stress, do they immediately go to the gin cupboard and take out gin, to the fridge, take out a beer, or do they sit down and attempt to resolve and talk through a problem? So at that very early level, in all sorts of subtle ways, children are picking up ways and means of behaving and of resolving problems, dealing with stress, dealing with conflict. Now, of course, as the child grows older, and this is what we would all hope for as parents, that the child begins to shift their not their values, but their sense of identity away from just a family base and through to the peer group. And of course, that's a crucial transition, because depending upon the peer group that they begin to mix with, they can either have a reinforcing set of values as far as the family base is concerned, or of course, it might be that the child decides for whatever reason to really move away from the family, almost as a rebellion. Well, I'll show you, I'll be independent, I'm feeling over controlled, I'll mix with that group. And especially the group that the parents have said to me is a child who shouldn't mix with. So I suppose to come back to the initial question, what role do the parents play? Exceptionally important. The younger child, the more influential are the parents. And of course that influence continues. I mean, even as adults, I think we look back often on our childhood and we say to ourselves, I had really good, loving, supportive parents, good values. Or my parents were always fighting, always conflict. I was always being judged for my behavior. The message when I think back on my life was that I was never good enough. I had to do something. And of course, I found the positive support that I so desperately wanted from my friends. Now, the fact that maybe my peer group are engaging in alcohol, I suppose the question could be, what can be wrong with that? If in my eyes, these are really good friends, supportive friends who are showing care and love for me, and they're engaging in drinking, underage or otherwise, what can be wrong with it? After all, they're good guys, so why shouldn't I also emulate them? So I hope that's to some extent answering the question and not going too much off the point. I think parents should start to begin to talk to the child, at least in their minds, really from the moment the child is born, or even before the child is born. Because we know that children are born into a family context. Now that family context, I believe, doesn't begin just when a couple decide to have a family. It predates that. So even the thinking process about having a family, the kind of family we want to have, that predates the beginning of the family. So when should they start to talk to the children? I would say as early as possible within the context of their home. For example, if the child comes from a family which has strong religious values, then I would say the time to start discussing drinking, underage drinking, would be that time when those sorts of discussions are maybe coming up in the church, in religious occasions. That is the time. I think it would be too late to start discussing it for the first time once a child comes home with a problem already. Because the question then is, what was leading up to that child engaging in activities or behaviors that to some extent run counter to family values, to the family's spiritual values? The most influential parenting style is a style, as corny as it might seem to be, a style which is filled with love, support and respect. So a parenting style rather that I think tends not to work is when parents are judgmental of their child's behavior, to some extent unforgiving. So the style is one where parents are strict and firm, but nonetheless there's support and respect for the child's opinions, views and attitudes. That then enables, I think, the child to feel free and open to discuss problems with parents, to discuss a concern they have, a curiosity they have about some of their friends who may be drinking underage. So there should be a family style, a parental style that says to the child, we are here for you, we're not going to judge you, we are open to your wanting to discuss this from us. It may be that as parents we have set ideas, set opinions, we hope you will learn from us. And that's quite different from saying to the child, do not engage in that behavior, do not hang around with those friends, without giving an explanation. So a good style, again, is to be, again, depending upon the age of the child, to give the child reasons for why it is that you hold a particular attitude, such as, do not mix with those children for the following reasons. We would value it if you were to look for other friends. Although it's one family, for all intents and purposes, it's almost, one could see it as being two different families because of the two different age groups. There's the young child, pre-adolescent, who's very involved and with the family. And in fact, the family really would be 95% of his or her little world. So I would say there's nothing much to say to that child at that stage unless they begin to ask questions, which no doubt they will from the mass media, probably from the internet. So respond to them as you would, as a supportive parent, the pros and cons, rather than pointing out the draconian dangers and the sinful nature of engaging in underage drinking. I think for the older child, who's now in a very interesting period, a transition is going on now between the family and the peer group. So it's even more important that the parents should be aware that children of that age, more and more, they're getting their information from school friends who are beginning to explore and experiment as they themselves are, from the internet, from the media. So the last thing the parent should be doing is to try to cover up by saying, you know what, don't engage in that behavior. You know what, that's bad, because the child will simply then look elsewhere for the information. So I think bearing in mind that for a parent with a young adolescent child, be open, be supportive, and whatever you say, however you say it, convey to the child, I'm not here to judge. It's a very complex world out there. And we are here to support you. Let's discuss the concerns you have. Let's discuss the questions you have. And the same message would be for the younger child, except that the younger child is more encapsulated still by the family. And there's, I think, less of a possible influence, positive or otherwise, of the peer group.